over and we'll
Thank you, Hannah, and good evening, everyone. Can you all hear me? Good, right, that's really going to help for the next, let's face it, which is going to be 40 minutes, 45 minutes. And can I say what a joy it is to be here this evening talking to you about something interesting. Two words beginning with a C, and look at them, neither of them is COVID. So that's a joy. So, ladies and gents, thanks for coming along. And the reason I've always had an enormous interest in the Byzantine Empire, basically, and it's simply never ever taught at schools. I've got a massive interest in Homer, so I spoke about that in the last two talks I gave. But no one ever talks about the Byzantines, and no one knows much about them, actually. In fact, as I'm going to go on to say, they shouldn't even be called the Byzantines. So I'm here this evening to speak to you about Constantine, Christianity, and the dream of Byzantium. So here we go. Here he is, Constantine the Great, the Emperor of Rome from 306 to 337 AD, currently a saint in the Orthodox Church, and he is probably the single most important in history that no one knows anything about. The reason he's so important is that he made two massive strategic decisions that changed the course of world history. Now, most leaders don't change the course of history, or if they do, they only ever do it once. So, I don't know, Theresa May, she was a leader, she didn't change the course of world history. No offense to Theresa May, but then again, I doubt Boris Johnson will either. Some leaders do change the course of world history, but it's obviously impressive. Sometimes they do it by accident rather than design. So I'm not going to denigrate, I don't know, Henry VIII. He broke from Rome. That was a completely sort of pragmatic operational decision on his part, really. And that did change the course of history. Alexander the Great changed the course of world history, but he only did it once. So when he went off with his army, that would fill 1/3 of Wembley Stadium. And in the space of 10 years, he conquered an empire the size of the USA. And only stopped in northern India. He only changed the course of world history once. But those two examples, Henry and Alexander, and they're the first that came to mind when I was drawing up this speech, each of those pale in comparison to either of the two enormous decisions made by Constantine. Now, the first decision that he made that changed the course of history relates to a Greek city, just one of many Greek settlements in what we now call modern Turkey. At that time, it was an offshoot of the Greek world. So the first relates to a city, and it's this one, Byzantium, on the Bosphorus, the strait leading to the Black Sea. And this was founded by colonists from the Greek mainland in 657 BC. So the city of Byzantium was already 929 years old by the time Constantine himself was born in 272 AD. And the second world-changing decision made by Constantine took place after he won the Battle of the Milvian Bridge in 312 against a rival to the imperial throne. Now, those two strategic decisions secured the Roman position for over 1,000 years, and they reverberate today. That's no cliche. I'm going to attempt to prove that the consequences of these two decisions made by Constantine live with us so deeply that not only do we not notice them on a conscious level, I'd go so far as to say that in the case of one of them, we cannot imagine life without it. It is enormous. So Constantine really is a very, very, very big deal. And he's probably the biggest deal that you've only ever heard of, but probably don't know much about, not offense. And I hope I haven't alienated my audience by insulting you at that point, but not you individually, I don't mean, but people generally don't know much about Constantine. So it's big talk. I know I'm bigging everything up, but this is a big topic. So there he is, Constantine the Great. And this is what he actually looked like. Modern facial recognition techniques now exist based on completely sophisticated computerized programming used apparently by intelligence services based on multiple statues and artistic depictions that have come to us through the ages. And they produce essentially a corporate face based on everything that has appeared. And they are amazing, these modern techniques, because this really does bring it home. You know, Constantine, we're used to thinking of Constantine looking like a statue, but when you see him as he was, near as damn it in a photograph, it's quite an arresting image. You're looking at Constantine the Great here. And because I can't resist modern facial recognition techniques, this is Julius Caesar. 300 years before Constantine, and unlike him, he was one of those world historical figures who only made one important world-changing decision. In his case, Caesar, he decided that it was time definitively to call time on the Roman Republican system and to set up an imperial system. So there's Caesar. But Constantine, as I keep on saying, made two decisions. Now, these two decisions, the first was made in 313 in the Edict of Milan, when he'd been emperor for 7 years. The second was enacted on Wednesday, the 11th of May, 330, when he'd been in charge for 24 years. And it secured the Roman Empire's position until Tuesday, the 29th of May, 1453, when it finally did fall. And it fell 1,123 years, 2 weeks, and 4 days after he enacted that second decision. That, ladies and gentlemen, 1,123 years, 2 weeks, and 4 days is how much extra time Constantine bought Rome. You'll see. Because on Monday, the 28th of May, 1453, there was a man in charge of the Roman Empire called Constantine the 11th. There he is. But on Wednesday, the 30th of May, 1453, it was over. Rome, the Roman Empire, had definitively and permanently ended. So that's the end of my lengthy preamble. I want to turn now my attention to what those two world-changing strategic decisions were, and I'm going to take the second one first. Now, this Greek city of Byzantium turned out, by sheer serendipity, to be in the perfect position, geopolitically speaking, and it turned out to have the perfect topography, militarily speaking. Now, as I've already said, it was 929 years old when Constantine was born in 272 AD. Constantine's one of these astonishing world figures that came from nowhere. He's actually the illegitimate son of a successful Roman general, Constantius Chlorus, and a barmaid in Serbia. He was an illegitimate son whom Constantius Chlorus later took an interest in when he was in his early 20s, and Constantius Chlorus became a Roman emperor, and the rest, as I say, is history. Anyway, when Constantine made this second decision of his, the strategic world decision in 324 AD, the city of Byzantium was 981 years old, and here it is, and at last I come to it. He made the decision to move the capital of the Roman Empire from Rome to Byzantium. He was going to rebuild and refound Byzantium as a new Rome, and he enacted that decision. He made the decision in 324, but he enacted it on Wednesday, 11th of May, 330, when Byzantium was 987 years old and was formally dedicated and renamed Constantinople, the city of Constantine, or as we say, Constantinople. Constantine knew what he was doing when he chose his new capital. The center of gravity in the Roman Empire had pretty much always been in the east, always, certainly after the conquest of Greece. So for the best part of 500 years, there was no equal balance. The center of gravity, it was all about the east. Every educated Roman was bilingual in Latin and Greek. Caesar would have spoken Greek fluently. Greek was actually more widely spoken in the eastern part of the empire and always had been. By 330 AD, Rome had already been a backwater, an irrelevance virtually, for a couple of centuries. For example, one of Constantine's immediate predecessors, Diocletian, had only ever visited Rome once in his long life. And he had his palace, I should say, was in Split in modern Croatia. Now, what Constantine did in his second decision, he had the boldness and vision to enshrine the obvious and do what needed to be done. The empire was Roman and would remain Roman, but the capital had to be moved to the Greek-speaking east. Now, we call the empire from that point onwards, from 330 AD, we call it the Byzantine Empire after Byzantium. But that's a completely artificial designation made up by historians, incidentally, in the 19th century. You must never, ever forget this central point. It was Roman. It always had been Roman, and they always called themselves Romans. They wouldn't have understood what the term Byzantine meant. But they called themselves Roman and Greek, so they use the word Romaioi. So it's a very, very important point that they called themselves Romans right up to the end on Tuesday, the 29th of May, 1453. Even their enemies called them Romans on the ground that they were Romans. So when the Ottoman Sultan Mehmet the Conqueror, who finally did take Constantinople on Tuesday, the 29th of May, 1453, he had no doubt that he was taking the Roman capital and defeating the Roman Empire. And even then, he didn't change the name of Constantinople to Istanbul. That came a lot later. He called it, it was known as Al-Constantinia. Again, the name of Constantine reverberates. Now, Istanbul, as Constantinople is now known, it's obviously still in the same place. So it's still where East and West meet and melt and meld and clash, just like it was in Constantinople. Nothing's changed. It's at that nexus point, planetarily speaking. So there it is on a world map. I want to zoom in a bit now. Now, as you'll see, Constantinople, there it is, has a commanding position on the Bosphorus, which commands the entry to the Black Sea. The Bosphorus is a strait that's about 1 kilometer across on average, and it's about 27 miles long. And if you hold Constantinople, you hold the aces in the military and economic deck of cards. When you control the entrance to the Bosphorus and the Black Sea, you control the trade and you control the military. It's all about that point there. Zooming in further, here is a satellite photo of modern Istanbul. Ancient Constantinople hasn't changed, geologically speaking, obviously. Now, when you look at Istanbul, Constantinople, you'll see, first of all, it's surrounded on 3 sides by the sea. You've got the Golden Horn there, you've got the Bosphorus here, and you've got the Sea of Marmara there. Now, this is an enormously big deal, militarily speaking, because it means, obviously, that Constantinople simply could not be taken without some sort of joint naval land and army link-up. You can take cities by land if they're on land. You can take them by sea if they're on the coast. But with this, you need an amphibious expedition. Now, that might sound obvious, but it's of profound strategic importance because amphibious expeditions by land and sea are very, very, very difficult to organize. And what it meant was that Constantinople was of such enormous strategic importance that it was virtually impregnable. Its location and geography and Constantine's decision to move the capital there meant that it kept the Roman Empire in existence for 977 years, longer than it would otherwise have done. That's a fact you can take to the bank. You'll see why soon. So here is a diagram of Constantinople in Constantine's time, because if it juts out to the sea, as it obviously does, if the walls that cover it from the land side were strong, the place became impregnable. Now, Constantine built these walls in 330 AD at the foundation of the city, the dedication of the city. But here we have the walls of Theodosius, built, well, 100 years later by one of his successors, Theodosius the Great. He extended the ambit of the city by building the Theodosian walls. Now, schematically, that city looks impregnable. If you're going to design a city that's almost impossible to take, it would actually look something like this. So, the Theodosian walls, there they are on the diagram. And here they are in a mock-up. This is what the Theodosian wall complex looked like. You've got an outer moat, you've got an inner military road, you've got a first wall, you've got a second military road, and you've got fortified points every 100 meters. It's also worth noticing the extensive farmland on the Constantinople's inward side. Now, this allows for food production in any siege situation, which obviously came in deeply handy. You know, the city could feed itself under siege. And this is a section of the Theodosian walls today. Very well preserved in sections, and there's still farming taking place within them. So you've seen these dates already. You've got the formal dedication of Constantinople in 330, and the day that it fell to the Ottoman Turks in 1453, 1123 years and 18 days later. But something very, very big happened on Monday, the 4th of September, 476, about 45 years after the Theodosian walls were completed. On that day in 476, Romulus Augustulus, the last Western emperor based in Rome, abdicated his position as emperor in favor of Odovacar, the king of the Goths. And at that point, and on that day, that was the end of the Western Roman Empire as a political entity. Now, because the Roman Empire's capital was by then in the east, and because by then Rome was a backwater only of symbolic importance, and because the capital was actually Constantinople, which was thriving, it meant that the Roman Empire, which would have ended on May the 4th of September 476 if Constantinople hadn't been founded, it meant that the Roman Empire continued for another 976 years, 9 months, 3 weeks, and 4 days, because that is the 29th of May, Tuesday, 1453. That figure at the bottom is how much time Constantine's great decision bought Rome, or I should say, I suppose, Constantinople. So that is Constantine's second massive strategic decision. The first decision, which took place after the Battle of the Milvian Bridge, which Constantine won against an imperial rival, and which is depicted in this Renaissance painting, quite a bad Renaissance painting, if you don't mind me saying, is even bigger. This is an even bigger decision, because after, or just before, the evening before the Battle of the Milvian Bridge, Constantine became a Christian. And 1 year later, in the Edict of Milan, as a Christian and a Roman emperor, He officially ended the persecution of the Christians, which had started under Diocletian, and officially gave them equal treatment under Roman law. Now that, and his own personal conversion, made the later adoption of Christianity as the official religion of Roman Empire an absolute inevitability. The word went out, the empire is Christian. Now, the centrality of the shift to Christianity is of just beyond massive importance. And it's actually conveyed by the painter quite well, to be fair, how I've been rude about the picture. So this is the Battle of the Milvian Bridge. Notice how the painter has placed the bridge in an utterly insignificant position that we can see on the right-hand side, because of perspective, the bridge is made to look of minor importance, which of course it is, because at the center of the picture, where the artist's eye is drawn, and the eye of Constantine himself, we now know he didn't look like that. He was actually better looking. The eye is drawn to this cross. Now, Constantine said that the night before the Battle of the Milvian Bridge, he had a vision or a dream. The Greek word is indistinct. It could be either, kind of doesn't matter really. He had a vision of a cross in the sky with Greek writing next to it, because Constantine would have, written and spoken and thought in Greek, en touto nika, which means win through this, win by this. And Constantine adopted the cross, became a Christian, inflicted a crushing victory over his rival, and became an undisputed Roman emperor. And the rest, as they say, is history. It's why Constantinople was a Christian city, because its founder was a Christian. And it's why this picture of Constantine XI, his late successor, over 1,000 years later, is why he's holding a cross. Constantine XI was a Christian man from a Christian culture of more than 1,100 years standing. Notice too the Greek script here, that we may have called them Byzantine emperors, and they may have been Roman, but they all spoke Greek as a first language. Because in so doing, Constantine didn't just become a Christian, he positioned Christianity as the central driving force of the Roman Empire. Rome became a Christian empire. Now, this is just beyond enormous. It means 300 years after its foundation, Christianity stopped being a breakaway sect, and a persecuted breakaway sect at that. It now wasn't just tolerated by the establishment, which it had been or hadn't been for the last 300 years. All of a sudden, Christianity was the establishment, and it remains the establishment in the West. It may be rocking and reeling at the moment, but it's still the establishment. The establishment, even today, establishes Catholic schools with Catholic headmasters giving talks. I'm only here because of Constantine. And here is an icon of the Catholic Emperor Constantine. There he is, at a church ecumenical council in 325 AD, even before the formal dedication of Constantinople, just across the Bosphorus from Constantinople. And he's presiding over a council of bishops at the church's very first Vatican II, if you want. Now have a look at him. First of all, he's at the center. You've got all the bishops here, and they're on the background, but there he is. Constantine's in the center, so he's in charge. He's got a halo. And his title as emperor, like all the Byzantine Roman emperors, one of his titles was Is Apostolos, which is Greek, and it means equal of the apostles. You get the apostles and you get the Byzantine Roman emperor. They're the same. And as I say, he's still venerated as a saint in the Orthodox Church. Now, the business of that ecumenical council was to hammer out a formal definition of the actual nature of Jesus Christ because there'd been raging controversies. We won't get onto that now. It's not the subject of this talk. But I might do one about the Arian heresies one time if I'm invited back. Anyway, the aim of this was to hammer out a creed, a formal definition of that which Christians believe. And at the Council of Nicaea in 325, they came up with, I believe in one God, the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth, of all things visible and invisible. I believe in one Lord Jesus Christ, the only begotten Son of God, born of the Father before all ages, God from light, light from light, true God from true God, begotten, not made. Does this sound familiar? Of course it does, because Constantine's major decision is not history, it is the present. So, under Constantine, the Roman Empire was pretty near its fullest extent. People in Newcastle upon Tyne, for example, we call them Geordies, don't we? They were ruled directly from Constantinople. We were living in a world where Geordies, Newcastle United supporters, were ruled directly from Constantinople. It's an astonishment. Let's fast forward now a couple of centuries. Here is Justinian the Great, one of Constantine's more successful successors. He ruled from 527 to 565 AD, and he was emperor for 38 years. And here he is on a mosaic, in a contemporary Byzantine mosaic in Ravenna in Italy. It's the Church of San Vitale. If you ever go to Ravenna, please go. Well, if you go to Italy, go to Ravenna, go to San Vitale, and you'll see this astonishing mosaic put up during the reign of Justinian. Here he is, and here he is close up. Here, opposite, on the other wall of San Vitale, is his wife Theodora, and here she is in close up, and I can't resist these modern facial recognition techniques. So here we go. You ready for it? Here it comes. There they are, Justinian and Theodora. Now these two, perhaps the biggest names in Byzantine history after Constantine himself. This pair presided over the apogee, the zenith of Byzantine history. This is the extent of the Byzantine emperor under Justinian. Now, you will recall that I said that Italy was lost to the Goths in the 470s. Justinian managed to reconquer Italy and retake North Africa, as it happened. That's a profound symbolic importance to a Roman Empire, of course, to retake Italy. But notice by this point, Spain has effectively gone, Gaul has gone, and I'm afraid the Geordies in Newcastle are now fully autonomous. I think still are, really, to be honest. So, however, even that isn't the greatest achievement of Justinian and Theodora. They built the great cathedral, the Hagia Sophia, the Church of Holy Wisdom in 537. Here it is. It is a mighty structure at the spiritual epicenter of the Christian Empire, and it still stands today gloriously. Although those 4 minarets were a later addition by the Ottoman Turks after they took the city in 1453. But there's the Church of Hagia Sophia, Holy Wisdom. And this is the inside. It became a mosque after it was taken by the Ottoman Turks. After Ataturk secularized Turkey, it became a museum from 1918. And it is now become a mosque again under Erdogan. It remains a historical a political touch point. But this is an interesting picture because, as I say, it was built in 537 AD as a Christian Catholic cathedral. For 1 millennium, it was the biggest indoor space constructed by humanity. That's quite a stat, isn't it? The biggest indoor space that human beings constructed for 1,000 years. So there's the interior today. Here it is again, another section. And have a look up here. You can see Our Lady enthroned in heaven with the child Jesus, still there. So, Hagia Sophia. Now, Justinian's reign, as I said, from 527 to 565 with Theodora, turned out to be the golden age of the Byzantines. The Emperor Heraclius, a generation or so after Justinian died, was the first to face a new foe, and that new enemy was the Muslims. Now, you've got to feel sorry for the Emperor Heraclius. After a series of stunning victories against the Persians, he was an incredibly successful emperor. Up until that point, he was simply unable to cope with the power and the energy of what was bursting out of the Arabian Peninsula. It wasn't just the power of the Muslim armies, it was the animating energy of the new monotheistic religion of Islam that had arrived. The Muslims regarded themselves, and still do, as pure monotheists, without the, well, I'm not going to get into theology, but what I'm saying is that there was a new monotheistic kid on the block, as it were, and that kid was bursting and brimming with energy. Now, they came out of the Arabian Peninsula, and Heraclius's brother, while Heraclius was in Constantinople, otherwise engaged, met the forces of the new Rashidun Caliphate on the banks of the Yarmouk River in modern Syria in 636, just 4 years after the death of the Prophet Muhammad. So this is right at the birth of Islam. Now, the Byzantine army was decisively defeated over 6 days. And the Byzantine Empire, after that point, was always on the defensive from that point onwards for the next 800 years or so. Forget the next 800 years, the next 40 years of that defeat of the Battle of the Yarmouk, the empire, the Byzantines, lost fully within 40 years, 2/3 of its territory. Damascus, Antioch, and Jerusalem fell. Palestine, Egypt, and North Africa were occupied by the Muslims. In 655, 19 years after the Battle of the Yarmouk, Constantinople itself came under siege but didn't fall. It was besieged by another caliphate army in 717 to 718 AD, but again, it did not fall. Its impregnability, which I've spoken about, saved it. And Constantinople became known among the Muslims as the bone in the throat of Allah. It would be another 700 years before that bone was finally dislodged. You can see the extent of the contraction of the Byzantine Empire. So here it is under Basil II. I've selected Basil II because he was the emperor at the turn of the millennium. And here it is by the mid-13th century. It's only the areas within the purple lines. By now, in the 1200s, it had lost pretty much all of its eastern territories to other non-Arab Muslim armies over the centuries. And the big problem at this point for the Byzantines turned out to be their nemesis. It was the arrival of the Ottoman Turks, who were taking over what we now call, for very obvious reasons, Turkey. So the Byzantines had contracted there by the 13th century, and by the mid-15th century, by the reign of the last emperor, Constantine XI, the empire, the Roman Empire, had contracted to basically the city of Constantinople itself, by virtue, as I said earlier, of its inherent pregnability. So Constantine the 11th ruled that map. And here is Constantine the 11th's adversary. Here's another massively important person in world history that most people haven't heard of. He's the Ottoman Sultan Mehmet II, soon to be known as Mehmet the Conqueror, because to him felt the massive, glittering, everlasting glory of being the first foreign adversary to take the city of Constantinople and to dislodge that bone from the throat of Allah. 700 years of impregnability had come to an end. It was believed by the Byzantines that the city was under the personal protection of Mary herself, Mary Theotokos, Mary the Mother of God, who was believed by its inhabitants to personally patrol the Theodosian walls. But on Tuesday, the 29th of May, 1453, as I say, those walls finally fell. Constantinople was taken by superior military technology. The Turks simply blew holes in the walls with cannon fire. And the city passed under Ottoman rule. And it remained under Ottoman rule, the capital of the Ottoman Empire, until 1918, when the Ottoman Empire fell at the end of World War I. But Istanbul, as it by then became known, of course, is still part of the nation state of Turkey. And I'm now coming to an end, and I want to leave you with a series of images. Here's the Blue Mosque in Istanbul today. It was built by Sultan Ahmed I, and it was completed in 1616. And it may remind you of Hagia Sophia, and that is deliberate because it was modeled on Hagia Sophia. So there it is, there it stands. It's got the great and singular honor in the Islamic world of having 6 minarets, this mosque, the Blue Mosque in Istanbul. And inside it's a marvel, again, modeled on Hagia Sophia. This is the interior today. You must visit it if you go to Istanbul. It's amazing. It's modeled on Hagia Sophia, which was a cathedral of light. And look where it's positioned. So here's my last image, and I'm going to leave you with this image. There's the Blue Mosque, and it's positioned 200 meters away from the Hagia Sophia, also now a mosque. Now, for me personally, this photograph and that positioning symbolizes the relationship between the East and the West. And Constantinople, Byzantium, Istanbul is where East and West meet on every level. If you look at the Blue Mosque and Hagia Sophia, are they standing opposite each other, staring each other down like a couple of architectural sumo wrestlers? Are they staring each other down, or do they coexist? Are they competing with each other, or are they learning from each other? Do they seek to supersede each other? Now, these are the questions asked by Byzantium, Constantinople, Istanbul, the city that has in its time been known in this order as the New Rome, the New Jerusalem, and Allah's eternal city. The answer to those questions, I would suggest, is still being played out, just as it always has been. So, thank you, ladies and gents. That's me, Hannah. Shall I come off share screen, Hannah?
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you. Thank you very much. Fantastic, lovely. So we'll hand over to questions now. I can see one's already come through in the chat. Mr. Stubbings, can you see that one? If not, I will read it out. I'll read it out.
My glasses, go ahead.
The question is asking you to explain why the official religion of the Catholic Church ended up being Latin and not Greek. I assume that means.
Ah, yes. Yes. Now again, no, my history is sketchier than it would otherwise, and I'm given the impression of it being, but there is an answer to that question. This relates fundamentally to the Great Schism that took place in 1054. There was, and again, this is not a strictly, well, it's historically accurate, but not highly academically expressed. There was permanent tension between the position of the Bishop of Rome, the Pope, and the Patriarch of Constantinople. Now, on the one hand, and this tension had always existed, only in the sense that there's kind of tension between, I don't know, Arsenal and Tottenham. They're both football teams. They're not doing different things. They're both involved in the same game. But the tension essentially was, you know, where did the real primacy lie? And although primacy lay theologically with the Bishop of Rome, the Pope, this primacy, the acknowledgement of such primacy in Constantinople became increasingly grudging over time. That would be true to say. And by 1054, there was a spectacular diplomatic spat between the Patriarchate and the papacy, which basically ended up in a schism between the church. And it's pretty much at that point where you have the first enormous split in Christianity between Western Christianity, where you have the Latin Rite in Rome, presided over by the Pope, Bishop of Rome, Catholicism, and what then became known increasingly as Orthodoxy with the Patriarchate of Constantinople, a position which incidentally which still exists in the Orthodox Church. So that's the reason that it's the Orthodox Catholic schism of 1054. And I can see various historians in front of me, actually. Look, I can see Mr. McGrath, the historian. Sorry, Mr. McGrath, and Sister Finbar, the theologian. But that broadly is the answer to the question, I would suggest.
Thank you. I've had a question come through to me. Istanbul is obviously a Muslim city at the moment. Do you think there might be a time when it's home to a different religion?
That's a really interesting question. Well, let me give it an historical answer. I don't see why not, historically speaking. Well, put it like this. It was founded in 657 AD. It spent 1,000 years as nearest damn 900 years as pagan. Then it spent 1,100 years as Christian, and it's had the last 550 years as Muslim. So if history is anything to go by, it's got 450 years left. Who knows? Who knows? But we know nothing lasts forever.
Right. Has anyone got any further questions? I'm going to give it a minute in case that's prompted any more thoughts.
Oh no, we get that deafening silence section.
I think it means everything was very, well explained.
No. It's no. Thank you everyone for listening, because I think if there's no more questions coming through, and remember my historicity is sketchy. I'm drawn by the enormous romance of the Byzantine aspect. We are all taught or led to believe that the Roman Empire fizzled away under its weight, under its weight and its own bureaucracy, its own internal problems, overrun by Vandals, Goths, Visigoths and Huns. It's just not true. It carried on until Tuesday, the 29th of May, 1453. Even, they were known, it was known, for example, the Ottoman Turks, they didn't call Turkey Turkey. They called it the Sultanate of Rum, the Sultanate of Rome. Mehmed the Conqueror took Rome. He took Rome down. That's what happened on that day. And that's kind of what floats my boat.
Okay, lovely. I can see my chat flashing, so I'll just have a little look to see if there's anything else come in. Gosh, right. I'm hoping this is a question. I'm just going to read through it. Apologies if it's not. By nature of history, the more time that decision or development has had to influence history, the more it will affect our culture. Yeah. With the idea of design cities such as Alexandria by Alexander the Great not supersede and influence the Western world and how we build infrastructure today as being vital to our modern lives. Sorry, Mr. Stubbings, you might want your glass.
I know we're moving into geography and geopolitics. Alexandria is a really, really, really interesting case. The big cities in late antiquity were Rome, honorifically speaking, Antioch, Constantinople, and Alexandria. Alexandria, really, really interesting. Alexandria fell, however, in the first rushing out of the Muslim armies from the Arabian Peninsula. It was amazing. You know, they got to the south of France within 100 years, and Alexandria fell during that period, thereby destabilizing Constantinople completely, because that's where they were getting the grain from. At that point, Constantinople's days were numbered, strategically speaking. As to where it is in terms of modern planning, I would suggest that if you look at the Chinese Empire, which is the new growing empire, I would suggest the Chinese have a plan, as we've learned in a previous talk. Part of the Silk Road was and remains Istanbul. You can't control anything geopolitically unless you've got some sort of hold and control over Istanbul. I saw a question pop up about the position of Turkey in the EU. And again, really, really, really interesting. It's the same old question that's being asked at all times. Is Turkey Eastern? Because the Turks came, you know, from northern China, in effect, what we now call Mongolia, or is it Western? We don't really know the answer to that question. We're working through the answer to that question. They didn't know the answer back in the day in Constantinople. Is Constantinople Istanbul where the East meets and melds, or is it where East and West clash? That's the big question that we need to ask ourselves and answer.
Yes, I think the question was, what would Constantine advise the EU to do? Which is a rather
I think he'd ask them to join. I would suggest he probably would ask them to join. Yeah, Constantine was a strategic thinker. Constantine wanted. Well, I won't use. You know, there's that famous, all to do with being inside tents rather than outside tents, and I'll leave it at that. I won't carry on the rest of that famous historical quote. That's where Constantine was coming from.
Was Rome from Byzantium still sending proconsuls out to govern Roman provinces, as in the Republic or under Augustus in 1400, or was it more of a cultural empire?
Oh no, it was a fully political entity. So while they were running the show, they would have sent out, you know, Roman legions, Roman proconsuls, absolutely. Culturally, over time, they came more and more. It became more and more Byzantine and Eastern, but the political construct was identical to Rome. Never forget that when he woke up on the morning of Tuesday, the 29th of May, 1453, Constantine XI not only looked at himself as the successor to Augustus, he was the successor to Augustus. He actually was. He was a true, full Roman. Okay,
right. I don't have any more questions in, and we're about 5 to 7. So
I think I've got more answers.
So I think there's nothing left to do but say thank you to Mr. Stubbings. Thank you to everyone who's joined us this evening. Really appreciate it. It's lovely to see people, and we obviously look forward to seeing you more face to face where we can this year.
Thank you, Hannah, and thanks everyone for logging on and for listening to me. And I'll now get on and start dealing with COVID. Right. Thank you.